Welcome to Freeworld Connect. I'm chairman of the Stockholm Free World Forum. My name is Gunnar Hökmark, and I have the pleasure today to introduce a discussion about what is going on in Hong Kong, but also how China is acting in these times of the corona pandemic. The corona pandemic is a shock and a crisis for all of us, but it creates also opportunities for dictatorships and autocrats to grab even more power. And what we have seen in the recent week is that the Beijing government is trying to take over more and more in Hong Kong with all the arrests and all other things that are going on. And we would like to have this update. We have with us today Wong Yik Mo and Janet Pang, both human rights activists and Democrat activists in Hong Kong. We have Roland Freudenstein from the Martens Centre in Brussels, research director and contributing to the European perspective and what we should do. And Katarina Tracz, who is executive director of Stockholm Free World Forum. Our idea is to give an update on what is going on in Hong Kong, how we shall look upon China, what democracies need to do in order to stand together and act together. And I would like to leave the floor to maybe to Janet, and we try to have 3 minutes, and then we proceed, and then we have a discussion. So Janet, please, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you. So I'm Janet Pang. I visited Sweden mid-January, also with the Freedom Forum. So I myself, it's a junior lawyer in Hong Kong. Have been helping with during anti-extradition movement. So in recent time, maybe from January to now, what we see it's the Chinese government and the Hong Kong government working together basically to weaponize the law, in my view, weaponize the law to silence opposition view, to silence Democrats. And at the same time, they put themselves above the laws. So last time when I visited, there were around 7,000 arrests. You see a lot of police brutality, crackdown going on, but no policeman has faced any disciplinary action. Today, it's close to 8,000 now. So during this 2 or 3 months, basically, even though the protests died down a bit because of coronavirus, there's still a lot of arrest going on. So this is the first point I would like to make. And certainly, there's no response.
Excuse me, Janet. Did you say sure. 8,000 arrests or?
Yeah, close to 8,000, I believe. Like early April, it was 7,800. Now I believe it's fair. It's either over 8,000 or very, very close to 8,000. And well, certainly there's no response to the 5 demands demanded by Hong Kong citizens. Universal suffrage, statutory inquiry to investigate into what happened. There's no response by the government on that part, so no progress on that part. And as we see in the recent 2 weeks, there are three things I would like to highlight to you. First, the government and the Chinese government, it's basically threatening to use law to disqualify one LegCo member, being Dennis Kwok, whom I worked with. They allege that he is filibustering in LegCo, so he's not carrying out his duty properly. And they are sending a lot of public messages, trying to use, we don't know what kind of law they will use eventually, but there are a lot of public messages that he might be eventually disqualified because of that. Secondly, so high degree of autonomy is promised in the basic law. But last week, we see the China Liaison's Office and the Hong Kong Macau office, who represent basically the Central People's Government, speaking a lot on Hong Kong and accusing a lot of including Dennis, that he's violating the law, and so this is not according to our understanding and the long-term understanding of Hong Kong, that these officers should restrict with local legal positions such as well. This is completely contrary to our understanding of one country, two systems. And thirdly, certainly, last 2 weeks ago on a Saturday, 15 of our pro-democracy heavyweight figures were arrested at the same time, including Mr. Martin Lee, who is known as the father of democracy, Ms. Margaret Ng, who has a very long-standing position, well-known position around the world, being very outspoken and representing democracy and the rule of law. I think Beijing is sending a very strong message to us and internationally that they don't care anymore. They're just trying to use all the public power they have to crack down on any democratic activists in Hong Kong. So this is really worrying. I think on these, I would leave more time for the floor to ask questions and for interaction. So on this note, I would really be grateful for my friends like you, for people in Sweden, for officials in Sweden, and those who have position in the Nordic Council to really keep close eyes as to what's happening in Hong Kong and monitor our situation, because it's gonna be a tough fight, but we will just have to go on. And recently, we also see, as coronavirus dies down a bit, we also see people starting to get active again. So yeah, I don't see people's going back. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Janet, and I can assure that people are following this from different parts of the world. That is the whole idea of Freeworld Connect. So it's not only Sweden or Scandinavia, and we have a lot of viewers from here, there, and everywhere, and I think that's important. I would like to turn to Mo, and please, could you give a short reflection from your side and your view on what is going on? I can't hear you.
You have to unmute, Mo.
Mo, you have to unmute. I can't hear Mo. Can the others?
No, unfortunately, we can't hear you right now, Mo. Perhaps you could try to leave the call and join it again.
Yes.
And we'll get back to
Good. So then I think we turn to Roland Freudenstein, Research Director at Martens Centre. And what do you think should be the European response to the repression in China as well, and the Chinese aggression we see today, but also in particular what is going on in Hong Kong?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me?
Mo, back. We can hear you.
Okay, good, super. So right, so my name is Mo.
We still can't hear you, Mo.
I can hear him.
Oh, you can't?
You can hear him. Okay.
Yes.
Then proceed. Then you tell him to proceed.
Please proceed, Mo.
Okay. Right. So my name is Mo. I'm a member of Demosisto. There are a few observations in Hong Kong. Well, the first one being, the government is, of course, using the coronavirus to crack down on protests. Only last weekend, we've seen protesters gathering again in shopping malls. and then they were dispersed by the police. So the police were coming into the shopping mall again, using guns to point at basically people. And it's getting more serious because using the ban on gathering, which can make it more strict for even, the residents. They can even disperse the residents. And we can expect this happening in the coming protests. For example, the 1st May protest, which is, of course, Labor Day. And that protest has been banned by the police using the same excuse. And as we all know, the 1st May protest is less political to this end. But then the government, of course, is using this opportunity to to start cracking down on any official protests, which we can expect the June 4th vigils for Tiananmen Square massacre. And then later will be June 9th, 1-year anniversary of 1 million people protesting. I mean, all these things will come, and we are expecting the government to do parallel to cracking down on protests. At the same time, they are arresting more protesters, as Janet just mentioned. Not just the 15 veteran democracy leaders, but also many other protesters, which we have observed from live streaming of news outlets, which normally happen during midnight, when they are not prepared. But then, people are coming back. Last weekend in Taikoo, people gathered to sing Glory to Hong Kong. And tomorrow, the May 1st, there are some protests planned already in different districts. And in fact, today and yesterday, there are also some other minor demonstrations happening. So we can expect people to take to the street again. But then with the government's stricter approach, I am quite concerned about the violence that's going to happen, well, of course, from the police side. The next thing that I would like to mention is the election. As we all know, last year in the district council election, we have won a landslide. And China will learn from this mistake, why they have lost in the election. They will only be more strict and using other means, including dirty means, to make sure that they win the election. But then during this coronavirus, I also see hope in solidarity with the world. Only last weekend, we see the international attention coming back for example, from Sweden. And we have been contacted by many press outlets and politicians. And I believe it's not just me, it's also my other colleagues, that people observed the same thing, that China is using the coronavirus not only to crack down on Hong Kong protests, but also to, I would call it, to invade into other countries' economy. For example, in Sweden, we've seen very recently, Sweden has canceled sister city with Shanghai, for example, from the city council's level. And then the last Confucius Institute has also been closed down in Sweden completely. And only last weekend, the moderate party has made a bill to make a quick legislation to ban any acquisition from foreign countries. And we all know that's targeting China and Russia. I mean, only in solidarity can we win the battle with China, because Hong Kong is not the only victim, but also the West. I'm very happy that we are connected to Sweden today, and I hope Sweden will take the lead in this in this battle in a way or another, demonstrate how we should fight against China.
Thank you, Mo, and thank you for providing us with that picture of the, unfortunately, more and more worrying development in Hong Kong. But that's why we're having this seminar, as you mentioned, to see how we in Sweden and in other countries where we have viewers will will handle the development and speak up for Hong Kong and the rights of the democracy movement in Hong Kong. So thank you for joining us. I will give the word to Roland Freudenstein, who is research director of the Martens Centre in Brussels, to could you, Roland, provide us on a perspective of the views of the EU and the various countries of the EU on the current situation, not only in Hong Kong, but on China's increasingly aggressive foreign policy actions as well. Please, Roland.
Indeed, thanks a lot. It's an honor to be here. I would say, first of all, the general feeling in the European Union is that autocrats across the world are using the corona pandemic for power grabs. This is the overall phenomenon, and this goes from Russia to China to even some countries inside the European Union. I mean, look at what's happening in Hungary or in Poland. So this is a global phenomenon. As to the People's Republic of China, it was already growing in importance, I would say, in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Also, the discussion about China has become more critical in that time. Now, I think this has exponentially grown in the last couple of months in the corona pandemic. It has grown because the virus came from Wuhan. It has grown because China is obviously using it to wage a kind of systemic rivalry with the West. I mean, again, the rivalry is nothing new, but it's getting more intense. And China seems to be getting more self-confident or more aggressive, however you want to label this. So I would say in the last couple of months, the intensity has increased exponentially, and also the discourse about China in Europe is getting much more critical, even more critical than it already was in the last couple of years. And now comes the big caveat, the but. While this is happening, there is a growing awareness that Europe is going to be economically weakened, massively weakened for the foreseeable future through the corona crisis. We are going into unprecedented levels of debt. And, I mean, Sweden is not part of the Eurozone, so you guys are spared the worst, but most of the European Union member states will go massively into debt. And we will see a recession, which might actually turn out to be much worse than both what China is experiencing and what the United States are experiencing. So here's the connection to China. And I'll just put it into the simple formula of my friend and colleague in Berlin, Jan Techau from the German Marshall Fund of the United States. So he asks, are we going to be too broke to be resilient to Chinese shopping sprees into our strategic infrastructure? Question mark. So, while we are becoming more aware of the dangers of China, and this is not only because of Corona, but this is also because of the what we call the digital authoritarianism, the social credit system, the export of big data, facial recognition, the whole support of authoritarianism across the world by technological and, of course, financial means. So, we are becoming more aware of this, and at the same time, there is huge fear that we will actually be economically so weak that we will be less resilient to all these Chinese power games that I described. And I just give you one example from my home country, Germany. I mean, Germany is, as you know, we export those BMWs and Mercedes cars, right? So who's going to buy them? Who is going to buy these cars in the future if the Chinese market drops out. And the last word here on the situation in Brussels. You know, there has been the one topic that has been most intensely discussed over the last couple of days in relation to China is at least halfway successful pressuring of the European External Action Service to tone down a report on Chinese disinformation, well, on foreign disinformation, including Chinese, to tone it down in its public reporting as a result of angry phone calls from the Chinese mission of to the European Union and to angry conversations that the Chinese Foreign Ministry had with the head of the EU delegation to Beijing. Now that, I mean, there is, as we speak, or actually in 2.5 hours, there will be a critical questioning in the European Parliament of the head of the External Action Service, Vice President of the European Commission, Josep Borrell. He will have to justify himself, and I can already predict that he will not look good, okay? But this is exactly what we're talking about, that, you know, and I must say, the reporting of the External Action Service was still courageous compared to some member state foreign ministries of the European Union. And I'm starting again with my own country. German Foreign Service isn't half as courageous as the European External Action Service is after the pressure from the People's Republic of China. So this is where we are at the moment. Last point. No, two more short points. One, unfortunately, recently on Hong Kong, dead silence in Brussels, dead silence from the European Union institutions, I have to say. So I just looked, I Googled this morning, European Union, Hong Kong, arrests and so on. All the entries are from 2019. There is nothing from this year. I then went on the European Union Office for Hong Kong and Macau website. All the declarations are about coronavirus, fighting the coronavirus, fighting the pandemic. Nothing, zero about democracy activists in Hong Kong and the Chinese power grab that has been very, very aptly described by our two Chinese colleagues. Our two Hong Kong colleagues. So. But here's the good news. I mean, at least the Martens Centre is working on this. The president of the Martens Centre, former Slovak Prime Minister Mikuláš Dzurinda, in the last presidency meeting of the European People's Party, brought this up. He brought this up without me having to talk to him before. He brought up the issue of democracy protests in Hong Kong, of the Chinese power grab, of China using the pandemic to crack down. And he promised to the European People's Party, which is the strongest political family in the European Union, he promised that the Martens Centre is going to take care of this and at least publish analyses and publish materials. And of course, cooperate with you guys.
Very, very good to hear, Roland. Just a short question before I leave the floor to Katarina, because I would like to ask her to say some words about the reactions in Sweden. But couldn't one say that China has overplayed their cards? Because in some way they're coming out stronger from this crisis than others. And US is not present at all in some way in the global context, while China is very present. That has become seen as a very aggressive partner, undermining others and using the crisis, in spite of the fact that the origin of this problem is coming not just from China, but from the repression in China. Couldn't one say that China also has overplayed their cards, Roland?
Yes, that is definitely a factor. I would even say China shot itself in the foot with many of its PR initiatives. You know, like the official Chinese Foreign Ministry speculation about the virus having been planted by American military personnel. As I said, the episode I described with the pressure on the External Action Service, you know what happened in the end is that now everyone is reading the original version of that report, which contains the harsher criticism of China. More people are reading this now because the whole affair blew up the way it did than ever would have if there had just been a normal leak, you know.
Yes.
So in a way, yes, China is shooting itself in the foot. That's the good part of the news, but this does not change the economic facts on the ground. And you know, I mean, whatever legislation we adopt, either in member states or on the EU level, about, you know, screening direct investment by foreign actors and all this, guys, this is the beginning of a process. These measures have no teeth, at least on the EU level. The EU cannot directly interfere.
Let's come back to that in a very short moment, but I would like to ask Katarina to give some views from the Swedish perspective and how the debate about China has developed, and then I would like to turn to Janet and Mo very shortly for trying to describe a start of a strategy to deal with this, including the economic component. Katarina, please.
Thank you, Gunnar, and thank you all the other participants for your insightful comments. To pick up on Gunnar's question, and then I will briefly comment on Roland's points as well. I think that Sweden, compared to several other European countries, has been made more aware of the issues with a more aggressive China, slightly earlier than several other countries. One of the reasons for that is that Sweden comparatively has kept a rather high moral tone, if you may. We have kept criticizing China, and we have noticed the consequences of that, not least lately. Just a few months ago, the Swedish Minister of Culture was to hand out a prize on a prize ceremony for press freedom, and the prize was awarded to Gui Minhai, a Swedish citizen who is held captive. It was held captive for a long time in China without the trial. And China tried to bully Sweden to back down from that and bully the culture minister to withdraw from the prize ceremony. But Sweden refused to do so, and the situation, the relation with China has been deteriorating even before that, but dramatically so ever since. So I think that Sweden is more aware of that. This does not, and it has sort of been a painful awakening for Sweden, as for many other countries. So there are some ideas of new laws when it comes to foreign investments, etc. But the process is rather slow here, as in many other places. I would like to comment on what Roland mentioned and the quote from your colleague, Roland, to whether or not we will be too broke to be resilient. I would like to put it the other way. I don't think we will be broker if we're not resilient. The costs that our societies will see from not acting now and not trying to sort of put our act together now will be much larger if we do not come together and cooperate right now. The economic facts are there. China is an economic giant. We have been guided by short-sightedness and short-term economic gains for a very long time, but through cooperation, I yet think it's possible, we can sort of be able to, by acting together, to turn this around. And in that sense, I think that the Corona crisis can actually be an opportunity as well. I think that the West is now painfully waking up to the fact that we will have to take economic costs for long-term geopolitical gains. And I think that insight is starting to come down now.
Janet, very short on how you think European and global response should be, and then to Mo, the same question, please.
I think I think we see China's trying to change the rhetoric, but as Roland and Katarina rightly point out, it's important to point out what have not been set right by China, and that would create the environment for us to work together. And I agree very much with Katarina on the point that look long term, work with partners who share similar values, and be more strategic. I'm not saying that, well, we should all not do business with China. For example, I work in the legal industry. Law firms still have to work with Chinese business and all that, but we have to understand our strength. That is, for Hong Kong, it's a different legal system, which remains the gateway between China and the outside world. And as for you guys, for example, how to work with China strategically, whether whether some countries prioritize for human rights, democratic values more than money in short run. I think there are a lot of strategies and ways we can work together to really keep pushing the democratic agenda.
Thank you very much. Mo, please.
Right. I totally agree on Katarina's comment on Roland's quote that, are you being too broke to be resilient? Sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but I think the others have to mute, because others
right,
otherwise it sounds weird.
Right. So I will also like to comment on Roland's remark that are you being too broke to be resilient? And I totally agree with Katarina. I mean, look at Hong Kong in 2003 when the SARS broke out. It's exactly the same as now the coronavirus. The only difference is the scale. The scale then was only in Hong Kong, and now it's the whole world. You know, China is always good at utilizing these opportunities, you know, to give a helping hand, quote. You know, Hong Kong became much more dependent on China in economy, and then what we have observed is that the whole economy model in Hong Kong changed. So if you go to the street, every shop is aiming at the Chinese tourists, and I mean, at the beginning we thought it's opportunity to recover our economy, but in the end, it's just a dead end. And I think it should apply to you as well in Europe. That depending on China will only make you more broke from the long run. I mean, what if China controls your infrastructure and your harbor and your airport and stuff? And just another point, when you think you depend on China, on the Chinese market, huge market, for example, BMW, if you don't sell it to China, who are you going to sell it to? But then as much as you need China, do you think China doesn't need you? I mean, look at your technology. Who can manufacture high quality vehicles as Germany, as Italy? I mean, look at the armored vehicles in Hong Kong. They're imported from Germany. And all the technologies to censor the Uyghurs in East Turkestan. I mean, German companies have stake in that. So, I mean, China is luring all the economies and especially enterprises into its little game, you know, to use money to control you so that you cannot throw out. And then you'll be part of it. But then just imagine, I mean, this is ideal case. Just try to imagine if all of you suddenly drop out, China will be in big trouble. I mean, trade is bilateral. When you think you need China, China actually also needs you. So, I mean, that's when you can have a stake and start to kind of fight back. And when we look at history, Russia, the USSR, and China, they are very similar. They are like massive authoritarian regimes. And the only difference is that China has learned from the mistake of USSR, that China is doing excellent in economy. And if you know why China is successful, then you know its weakness. I mean, why not target the economy? Sorry, I know I'm taking up too much time, but then, you know, in Hong Kong, we talk about yellow economy, which is to, you know, to support businesses that would support the movement. So this should apply to Europe as well, just like Katarina said.
Thank you.
Use okay.
Thank you very much, Mo. And I think your reflection about that China is just as dependent on others as others are dependent on China, that really goes two ways. And I think when I reflected on to Roland that China has overplayed its cards, that it's not only in a political way, but China's way of acting has also underlined the dangers of being too dependent on distribution chains coming from China. And there are also a lack of credibility when China is implicitly or explicitly putting political preconditions on regular trade. So I think I would say that China has shot itself in the left foot and in the right foot, and that hurts very much. And I think that isn't understood all over the world. As I see, the important thing now is that we don't let the pendulum strike back in the other direction, because I think it's important that China is a part of the global economy. It's important for us all, but we need to clarify that it is on the preconditions of free trade, meaning free trade, but also on the preconditions of respecting others. And just a short reflection about the strategy, and if Roland would like to give a short comment on this, and then others very shortly. But I think a part of a strategy need to be that we shall not become protectionistic. I don't think it's a problem with just in time, but the problem is just only one. European companies will, on their own, understand the need to have different companies and partners all over the world, but also we need to clarify to China that we are not yielding to them when they are threatening us, and that's maybe for the time being the most dangerous thing, because a lot of governments and a lot of people in the debate say that let's be careful just now. That's the biggest danger. It's much better that China knows that whenever you are aggressive or threatening, you lose. Or just that we always will criticize the dictatorship and the repression, or that we always will react when they're trying to shrink democracy in Hong Kong. Then they know that. Let's not give them a room for that. And I think one of our most important things need to be that we need to develop not only an understanding, but a strategy including actions in order to defend our societies, but also in order to defend democracy and defend democracy in Hong Kong. Roland, would you like to have a go? Just say 1 minute about that, and then I will give 1 minute to all the others, and then we will end up here.
Well, what else can I do but agree, Gunnar?
I like that approach, Roland.
That's it took me a long time, but then I finally adopted it. I posted in the chat column the link to an article, a fundamental strategy article about EU-China relations. Now, I wrote that 2 years ago, but it really is still, it's totally still up to date, I would say. Now, very briefly, three aspects that I would like to bring up. One has already been mentioned by Mo and Janet and the others. Unity is key. We cannot let ourselves be divided. But, and here comes the big but again, if transatlantic relations were in a better condition, that would be easier. I'm putting it out like that. The Trump administration and the personality of Trump has made it extremely hard for Europeans to preach the transatlantic gospel and transatlantic unity vis-a-vis China. And even, otherwise reasonable people like Angela Merkel are still careful vis-a-vis China because of the way the US government and especially President Trump have been acting over the last 3 years. So that is the second point. And the third point is one of my demands in the article I wrote is we badly need a big push to increase our knowledge of China and our knowledge of the Chinese language, and no matter whether it's Mandarin or Cantonese. But we need to learn more about China, and the European Union needs to make funds available to researchers, think tanks, schools that are today dependent on Chinese Communist Party related institutions for their research on China, and that is already a bad beginning. So by the way, the two Confucius Institutes in Brussels have been closed for espionage activities.
Okay, thank you, Katarina. Very short, 1 minute.
No, I think I want to pick up what Roland stressed, that unity is key, but we also have to understand here that it will not always look perfect. It will not always be unflawed, but we will have to work together in the way we can. And if there's a lot of criticism now of the lack of unity within the European Union and between transatlantic, across the Atlantic, etc. But we will have to go back sort of to our roots and remember that we are much more alike than what our enemies are like each other. So we have a strong possible grounds for even stronger cooperation here. Even though it's flawed and even though we have our differences, we still have sort of the best possible position to cooperate, and that is what we have to do. Otherwise, we have a much weaker chance.
Mo, 1 minute, and then Janet, please. Unmute, Mo.
Okay, can you hear me now? Good. Right. I totally agree with Roland that we need to understand China. I mean, even Hong Kongers, we need to understand China. And I'm sure that most Hong Kong protesters do not understand China enough in order to come up with good strategy. But I mean, without a Confucius Institute, you can also learn, let's say, Chinese language from Taiwan or from Hong Kong. I mean, it's not just China that will speak Chinese. And from Malaysia, from Singapore, etc. I would like to point out that the only key, aside from unity, of course, the only key to beat China is the economy. And we have to develop economy based on conscience to trade with people with the same value. And that is the key to be less dependent on China. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. Thank you very much. And Janet, please.
Yes, completely agree with everyone. Unity is the key, and we have to maintain this kind of conversation more to update each other with what's happening. So thank you so much for today's opportunity that I can tell you, Mo and I can tell you what has been going on in Hong Kong. And as far as we do business with China, in a unified term, we have to stay vigilant as well. So that's why a lot of us in Hong Kong have been pushing for building in, for example, human rights clauses when there are bilateral trades. So I'm sure democratic values and human rights are all what we share, and I would say that this, in the long term, I hope this is the way to go for everyone.
Thank you very much. Katarina said one thing that I would like to repeat and underline, that is that we are much more alike than the enemies of democracy. And sometimes we tend to forget that, and that is a strength, and it underlines also the need for unity, not only in the matter that we are united in how we look upon things, but also unity in how we react. I think this is the first global crisis where US, because of different reasons, has not been present in the global scene active, while China has become very present. And one of the things we need to know more about China is also to understand that China is not only one of the biggest economies of the world, it is the biggest dictatorship of the world. And it's acting with the logics of a dictatorship. And that is sometimes forgotten when we discuss economic and commercial relations. And one conclusion I have is that the theme, the free world, has for a long time been present as a theme in a discussion. I think we need to give it a much more structured content and structure and cooperation, and also see that the free world is, of economical reasons, but also political reasons, far stronger than China. If you add the GDPs of the free world, we are in that sense outcompeting the GDP of China many times, but also a much stronger political agenda. And we need to stick to that. I think there's an old phrasing that I will repeat, but if we don't hang together, we will all hang together. And I think we shall avoid that. Katarina and I were very happy to have this opportunity, and we will continue with Freeworld Connect just because of the reason we would like to give substance to what the free world is. And we hope to have the opportunity to meet you a number of different times in the next coming weeks and months. So once again, thanks to you and thanks to all of you who follow this broadcast. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.